Hope that is looking good up there. Good. It's Monday morning, and this is my new time, Monday, Tuesday, 8 to 9 a.m. Also broadcasting here at K Talk, although the recording looks a little odd. So I assume everything is fine. We are in the 14th day, almost halfway through July already. 10 days away from our big state holiday. Anyway, if you're just tuning in for the first time, I'm Jack Stockwell. More information about me at forbiddendoctor.com. I am not the Forbidden Doctor. The Forbidden Doctor is that doctor healing power deep inside your own body that you're forbidden to know about, and that's why I use that moniker. My Wednesday health program will still be 7 to 9 a.m., but Monday and Tuesday, 8 to 9, also showing up here on the live stream at the same time. So I hope this is going to work out. I am so busy. I'm only 74, and I've got so many things I've got going. I just needed some extra time. So I will just cram everything into an hour here. I've got several things to talk about, but of course the big elephant in the room is, can our government get any more corrupt than it is right now? From the top, stinking slush to the bottom. I will get to that. There's a couple of other things in the way of update that I want to get to first, and then, gee whiz, just who expected this? Who expected what is going on right now? And of course, I'm focusing on Epstein. I will get to that here before the program's over. But the Senate, I'm going to start off with some other things. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, chaired by Senator Rand Paul, released its report on the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt on U.S. President Donald Trump in 2024. And they found that the repeated denial of extra security assets that were just requested left and right at the time, when Trump faced heightened threats, was the key to the problem. And very poor broadcast. Yeah, one might expect that, because the recording looks really bad. So who knows? Who knows what's going on? But I think it's coming through on the stream. Those of you can use the comments. Those of you who are on the stream, you can use the comments. You might tune in and let me know if the stream is okay. Because that's where my attention is moving anyway. So the committee conducted 17 interviews with the Secret Service staff and reviewed more than 75,000 pages of law enforcement comments and documents during its investigation over the past year to reach the conclusions that it came to. And the report said this: what happened was inexcusable, and the consequences imposed for the failures so far do not reflect the severity of the situation. The consequences. The consequences for the failures so far do not reflect the severity of the situation. The severity of the situation, we almost lost a presidential candidate to assassination. So the consequences imposed for that would be what? Somebody getting fired? There were people who stepped down. So the committee contested a statement from former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, of course, who stepped down, in which she claimed that requests for extra security issues at the Butler rally were not denied. She said the committee is aware by the US's own admission that this claim is false. Cheadle resigned in the aftermath of the shooting, saying she took full responsibility for the failure. It remains unclear, however, whether anyone in Washington is prepared to assume any responsibility for what was either a reckless disregard for the climate of assassinations that we knew were going on at the time anyway, or an intentional stripping of security, which would hold even more consequential consequences. What is clear is that the report focused on technical problems and minor reforms, not a systemic failure. So in a statement yesterday, Secret Service Director Sean Curran said the agency would continue to cooperate with the Senate committee and that following last year's shooting, quote, the Secret Service took a serious look at our operations and implemented substantive reforms to address the failures that occurred that day. It's what they're not saying. Anyway, the central failure was described as a lack of structured communication by the Secret Service, which allowed the shooter, Thomas Crooks, to evade detection for almost 45 minutes. Now, the central failure was a lack of structured communication. Now, to me, that implies structured communication would mean there's various levels from the people on the ground with a little wire in their ear and the dark glasses walking around, all the way up to people who make last-minute decisions. At least that's how I see it. Plus collateral stuff. On each level of the structure, there would be some collateral movement of people who are being involved. And he said the failure was a lack of structured communication. Like, who do I talk to? Who do I report to? There's a fellow on a roof over there with a gun. Should I report that? In particular, the report singled out the Secret Service's security room agent, whose job it is to manage these communications between all the parties in securing the overall safety of the event to ensure what they call situational awareness. Now, if you have a failure of structured communication, you obviously are going to have a failure of situational awareness. About 25 minutes before the shooting, the security room agent knew that a local tactical team was looking for a person equipped with a rangefinder, but did not make that generally known to the security team. Thanks, Paul. So a Pennsylvania state police officer who was in the Secret Service security room told the committee about this matter, and he testified that it seemed the security room agent did not act with any urgency. And when he informed the agent that the suspect was seen on the top of a roof, it was unclear whether that caused the agent to inform anybody else. I mean, this is a comedy of errors. This is ridiculous. This is the failure of structured communication. The security agent, interestingly enough, in the security room, who's supposed to be coordinating all this stuff, knew that a fellow had been seen with a rangefinder, knew that there was somebody on a roof, and it's unclear why he failed to inform others 45 minutes before the shooting. So the agent, unnamed by the report, testified that he was not aware of a person on the roof. He only heard via communications that people were trying to solve a problem at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So hence, no one stopped Trump from walking on stage, even though they had this various level of miscommunication. They couldn't find the person that supposedly had a rangefinder. One person said he saw somebody on the roof. The agent inside the security room said he didn't see anybody on a roof. And nobody bothered to stop the president from walking on stage, where he was shot at 6:15 p.m. So 63 years after Kennedy's assassination, 58 years after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, can these kinds of explanations be considered credible? In other words, can you accept the fact that they just screwed up, or something more insidious going on? So lost in the fog of this narrative as distraction are some very serious investigative essentials. For example, Thomas Crooks had apparently studied the May 15th, 2024 assassination attempt against Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who was also an opponent of endless wars with Russia over the Ukraine, prior to his involvement. In some ways, the July 13th assassination attempt against President Trump, much the same way. So here's this guy laying down on the roof, rangefinder rifle, had studied 2 months earlier the assassination attempt of Robert Fico, president of Slovakia, or the prime minister of Slovakia. All right. A couple other things I want to get to before I get to Epstein. That's going to be fun. Today, a funeral, or I guess maybe it was yesterday, a funeral for a 20-year-old American man was held in the occupied West Bank. And he was beaten to death on Friday, July 11th. Seyfullah Musalet was, I'm quoting here, brutally beaten to death by a group of Israeli racist thugs, otherwise known as settlers. A spokesperson for the U.S. Embassy in Israel confirmed Musalet's death. After beating him, the settlers then blocked an ambulance from reaching the victim for 3 hours. And this is an American, mind you, visiting family in the West Bank. Only after they were dispersed was Musalet's brother able to carry him to an ambulance. However, he died before reaching the hospital. His family released a statement which calls upon the U.S. State Department to lead an immediate investigation and hold the Israeli settlers who killed him accountable for their crimes. So in response to a request for comment from NBC News, a State Department spokesperson said that it was aware of reports of the death of a U.S. citizen in the West Bank, adding the department had no further comment out of respect for the privacy of the family and the loved ones of the reported victim. Now, of course, one can imagine the response according to the family had an American been beaten to death in China or Iran or Russia. When he's beaten to death in the West Bank, then, of course, he has no business being there. So he's born in Florida, worked in a family ice cream shop, Tampa's Ice Screamin'. His cousin Fatma Muhammad told NBC News yesterday that Musalet had traveled to the West Bank in June to visit his mother, his brother, and his sister. And the family statement said, he was a kind, hardworking, deeply respected young man working to build his dreams. We are devastated that our beloved Seyfullah Musalet, nicknamed Saif, was brutally beaten to death by Israeli settlers while he was protecting his family's land from settlers who were attempting to steal it. Now, you know a lot of these settlers are. These aren't, a lot of the settlers in the West Bank, they're not so much people who just got tired of the life in the big city of Haifa or Tel Aviv and decided to go out into the country, further into the desert of the West Bank. Although the West Bank is a bit green. These are people from Brooklyn who decided to leave the United States and go live in the West Bank of Israel. That's who these thugs come from. Now, the site of the killings, the town near Ramallah, called Al-Mazraz Ash-Shakia, houses many of Palestine's better-off citizens. And a close family friend, Nizer Milbs, told NBC News that many residents of the town are Americans. Sorry, that sounded like they were playing something there. And that the town was known for its rolling hills, olive trees, and upscale homes. He said, there's nothing left over here for people to enjoy. The settlers have taken everything. People can't even go there anymore. The settlers have burned the vacation homes. They've encroached and put their stuff there. The Israeli daily Haaretz reports, according to Mutaz Tawafsha, head of the Sinjil town local council, that for the past 2 months a large group of settlers have been attempting to establish an outpost south of the village. Any resident or farmer who tries to reach their land is attacked by these settlers. They're fired at, physically assaulted. This land is dear to us and we will not leave it. In the area, settlers have recently been torching homes, vehicles, and agricultural fields. On July 11th, the settlers assaulted and injured a dozen, including Saif Musalet, but he, along with Mohammed al-Shalabi, a Palestinian, were the only ones who died from their wounds when settlers blocked the ambulances. Al-Shalabi died. It reminds me of Princess Di, having her chest crushed in that accident, denied medical care for 45 minutes before they finally came to her to take her to the hospital. Al-Shalabi died of his gunshot wounds, being shot in the chest with a bullet entering from his back. He was left bleeding for hours before medics could reach him, which contributed, of course, to his death. A family member told Haaretz that he saw signs of choking and violence against Shalabi's body and that his feet were burned. So 3 arrests were made, 2 anti-settler Israelis on suspicion of acting in a manner that would endanger public security, and a resident of northern Israel's Masrah on suspicion of disturbing the peace. All 3 were released the next morning. Apparently none of the local settlers were detained. So the Israeli Defense Forces said on July 11th it was, quote, aware of reports regarding a Palestinian civilian killed and a number of injured Palestinians as a result of the confrontation. And they are being looked into by the ISA and the Israeli police. So aside from their record of rarely taking any kind of action against the settlers, they also conspicuously omitted any mention of the American civilian who was killed. So an Israeli human rights group, Yesh Din, reports that over the last 2 decades, more than 93% of investigations of settler violence closed without an indictment, and only 3% of the investigations led to a conviction. They said the low conviction rate sends the message that the law enforcement system in its entirety does not consider settler violence to be a serious issue, contributing to the perpetrator's sense of immunity. I really think that if they got a picture of these settlers who did that, they would be dressed in white hoods and robes with some kind of Ku Klux Klan insignia on the front of their outfits. It's just absolutely disgusting. But that's the way things are being done. That's the way they are in the West Bank. Now, that clown Zelensky came up with another clownish behavior over the weekend. I just really enjoyed this one because right on schedule, following the announcement by President Trump of the comments regarding the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Ukraine's acting president Zelensky waved yet another series of bloody shirts, I think they called it. Now, Russia supposedly targeted a maternity hospital for his bombs. I heard that on the news this morning. But I thought, no, Russia doesn't target hospitals. Zelensky does. But Russia doesn't, so I had to investigate it. Look into it a little deeper. What I found was, and the claim, of course, is that Russia supposedly on purpose targeted a maternity hospital. Zelensky said this: among the wounded are women in a maternity hospital, mothers with newborns, women recovering from surgery. Fortunately, no children were injured. Russia is targeting life itself, even in the very places where it begins. Oh my goodness, it's just enough to make you cry. Now, the drones and missiles, including Iskanders, that Russia has been using, when it hits its target, it's destroyed. Now think about this. Putin sends, or the armed forces, sends a drone against a maternity hospital, and no babies are hurt. Even Zelensky said that. No children were injured. That right there ought to make you sit back for a second. So before all the digital noise had finally settled down for a moment, a reporter asked Trump what his reaction was to the heinous attack on the maternity hospital, and he was reported to have said, "Oh, you'll be seeing things happen." Now, what actually happened, and I had to look further into this to find it, is that 2 Russian drones hit a target in Kharkiv, not a maternity hospital, but one that the head of the Kharkiv Oblast Military Administration would only identify as a 3-story building in the Sativsky district. He said a fire broke out, a 64-year-old man was injured, and then afterwards the Kharkiv mayor amplified the matters to somewhat. He said this, and I quote directly: "A functioning medical facility has been affected in the city center as a result of the enemy attack. Early reports indicate that windows had been shattered, but the building is still being inspected. So the claim actually is that the windows of a nearby maternity hospital were destroyed," which is a credible claim. I have no problem with that. And then the mayor says, quote, "The Friday morning attack affected a maternity hospital where mothers and newborns were staying. They will now be evacuated to another medical facility. Luckily, none of them was injured." So no one was injured by the shattered windows. Now, apparently Zelensky needed something more than this, so later the report is put out that 3 women and their newborns were injured. But a closer look shows the medical diagnoses where the women were suffering from acute stress reactions. So a woman has just delivered a baby. The baby is in her arms, in a bed, in the hospital, and the window next to her is shattered because of explosions down the street. Of course she's going to be stressed. She may well think the next bomb is going to fly into her hospital room. I can understand that. But it's just more Zelensky's antics. Now, coverage of the week in Russia broadcast on Saturday, I think it was. Russia 1, the TV quoted from presidential assistant Yushakov's briefing on Putin's discussion with President Trump. This included both President Trump's greeting to President Putin's discussion with President Trump, which included Putin's greeting to President Trump on the occasion of the July 4th anniversary of our independence, as well as Russia's recognition of the 160th anniversary of the end of the American Civil War. Russia 1 then showed pictures and documents from the period of the American Revolution and the U.S. assistance to Russia during the Crimean War. Do you know that we helped Russia against the Brits and the French in the Crimean War? And when Russia was fighting France and Great Britain, and the deployment of the Russian fleet to New York and San Francisco during 1861 to 1865 Civil War, expressing support for the Union cause. Now, I know the Russians were involved with helping to intercept British transport in the Revolution. Well, sounds like there's something playing at K-Talk. So I'm going to continue with my stream. So a couple more things that I want to get to. Epstein. That'll be the fun talk of the morning. So after Friday's beating to death by Israeli settlers, actually the Klan, the Israeli version of the Klan, but they're referred to as settlers in the news. The Council on American Islamic Relations called on Washington to step in and protect its citizens, the Palestinian Americans, from being murdered. And so its deputy director, Edward Ahmed Mitchell, said, "Every other murder of an American citizen has gone unpublished by the American government, which is why the Israeli government keeps wantonly killing American Palestinians and, of course, other Palestinians." So the brutal death of this Tampa resident apparently has been preceded by at least 8 other such killings of Americans in the last 3 years. Mitchell said this: "If President Trump will not even put America first when Israel murders American citizens, then this is truly an Israeli first administration." You got to love that. I think that's significant. And all right, now I heard on the news a little bit about Mein Kampf and Adolf Hitler this morning. Caught it out of the corner of my ear getting out of the shower. So I looked into this. Leave it to the British to keep rewriting history to cover up their role of the London-centered geopolitical ideology and operatives in the city of London who were responsible for Hitler, while providing this is referred to as a Delphic peace, targeting today's opponents of the empire as Hitler-loving fascists. So The Independent, on July 12th, published a piece by John Camphor titled 100 Years of Mein Kampf, Why Hitler Believed England to be His Truest European Ally. So with this very provocative title, one might assume Camphor's intent might have been to set the record straight on how the British establishment, working with the Wall Street bankers, of which there were several, in order to make sure Hitler got into power in 1933. Now, this isn't some spurious, attention-distracting title to take your attention off what's going on. Everybody knows this. This isn't something new. This isn't something that came out of some FBI papers that were finally released. Everybody's known, especially when Roosevelt went after the Bush Empire in 1942, wanting to try them for treason. But of course, the powers that ran America were more powerful than Roosevelt. But anyway, in this twisted polemic that came out of The Independent, which says little about the geopolitical intent of Britain's imperial policy, one which combined a strategy to preserve the Anglo Empire, I should say, with murderous racist and eugenics policies, in collaboration with the American Malthusian partners like the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, the Bushes, rather than in exposing the defense of the empire as a cause for 2 world wars, instigated by Britain to oppose a Eurasian perspective for cooperation with Europe. He comes right out and accuses Trump and Maloney and Orban from borrowing from Mein Kampf. And Camphor claims that he engaged in extensive research into Mein Kampf. He admits that he found that Hitler admired England, and he wrote, "The most intriguing aspect for me was Hitler's loathing of the French and his respect for the English, even when exposed through suspicion, when musing about Lebensraum," which German for trying to find new lands in the East. He believed there was only one like-minded country with whom Hitler could make such a deal. And he said Hitler had one ally in Europe, England. Now, I got some comments about this, but I want to finish what this article says. Yet rather than pursuing this theme, He fails to mention the broader goal of the Hitler Project, sending the German military to the east against Russia. And this is why World War II happened. Under British control, the Americans fell right into it. Eisenhower didn't like it. He knew what was going on. He tried to make steps against it, but even he wasn't that powerful, even though he was general of the armies. It was to engage in a mutually destructive policy of eliminating both nations as opponents to the British imperial global design. And there's very good reason for him leaving that out of the report. The same geopolitical intent underlies what's going on today in targeting Russia with Ukraine and the anti-BRICS provocations that are coming from the transatlantic establishment today. That was what World War II was about. Now, a lot of people say, well, World War II was to safely create Israel. Well, that was one of the byproducts. World War I was to make sure that the Zionist attempts to create a homeland for the Jews would begin. Well, it did, but that was one of the side effects. The main intent, led by British intelligence of World War I and World War II, and they didn't care how many of their own people died, was to bust up Germany's military power and Russia's military power. And the idea with World War II and the assurance of money and oil for Hitler to move east into Russia was to make sure, because they knew that both of these two behemoths fighting each other would so decimate through attrition the fighting power of either's military strength, so that internal disruptions would take place and ethnics fighting ethnics would reduce the defensive posture of Germany and Russia to the point where the empire could step in and take over the massive productive capabilities of Germany and the strategic reserves of Russia. That is pure and simple what is going on today with NATO and the United States war against Russia. The same damn thing. All right. Now that I got that out of me. So Friday, Tucker Carlson says he thinks who funded Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. You know, it just gets funnier and funnier. But if after this last week regarding Epstein, if you can't come to the undeniable conclusion that your government is utterly, utterly corrupt, I don't know what else would bring us to that understanding. So it wasn't Epstein, according to Tucker. What he said is guaranteed to make a lot of people in Washington extremely furious, and he can't take it back. There's not going to be any walking back of this. On Tuesday, Tucker Carlson delivered two theories on why Pam Bondi won't release the Epstein files. And of course, theory number one was that Trump was involved. And Carlson said, and I kind of believe it, even though Trump was very cozy with Epstein, the photographs are there, and now there's all these other photographs showing up. You don't know if they're AI, you don't know if they're the real thing. But theory number one is that Pam Bondi won't release what she said she would release when she said they had thousands of files. Now, of course, there's none. But when there was a bunch of them, that Trump was involved. Now, Carlson doesn't believe that. And then came theory number two, which, of course, to me is the most obvious thing of all, was that Carlson came out and said that the intel services are at the very center of this story, both through the Mossad and the CIA, and that they're being protected. And the idea that they won't release these files is because they want the intel services of the Mossad and the CIA to be protected, because that's who's really behind all of this stuff. And then, of course, there's the argument, does the Mossad control the CIA, or does the CIA control Mossad? I think it's the CIA, personally. But Carlson says he thinks that's the most plausible explanation. So Friday night, just here the other day, He's speaking in front of a live audience at Turning Point USA event in Tampa. And Carlson came to a conclusion while he's standing there on the stage. And he boldly said he believes foreign intelligence was behind the Epstein blackmail operation. And of course, there are those in the audience. What country, Tucker? What country? Oh, Israel, of course. And he named it Israel. He said, I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of Intel Services, probably not America. End quote. Then he said, and we have every right to ask on whose behalf was he working? How does a guy, referring to Epstein, go from being a math teacher at the Dalton School in the late 70s with no college degree to having multiple airplanes, a private island, and the largest residential house in Manhattan? Where did all that money come from? Carlson asked. Then the big claim. This is quoting directly from Carlson. And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of that because no one ever tried. And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. And now no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There's nothing wrong with saying that, Carlson said. There's nothing hateful about that. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. There's nothing even anti-Israel about saying that. Someone who agrees with Carlson's assessment, of course, is the CIA whistleblower, John Kiriakou. And on Wednesday last week, he told the story of the recruitment of a copy machine repairman who earned his CIA operational officer a big promotion. At first, he laughed at the notion of a copy machine repairman being useful, but then he realized the brilliance of the plan when he learned that the repairman secretly sent every document from a prime minister's office straight to the CIA. How did he do that? By planting a tiny device on the copy machine. Now just think about how brilliant that is. You got an office on, I don't know, whatever level of security in the CIA. And you got out in any CIA office around where you got a station chief, and then you got people under them at various levels in charge of different things. And they have a central office with a copy machine. And so here comes a guy who doesn't seem like the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he knows how to fix a copy machine. And that's the image he tries to portray, that he doesn't know anything about international intrigue. He doesn't know anything about international security or intelligence gathering or anything else. He's just there to fix the copy machine. And so who's going to watch what he's doing while he installs a tiny device that digitally records and sends a copy of every damn thing that goes through the copy machine? Not so dumb. So the flow of intelligence was pure leverage. Kiriakou says this: you know what they're thinking, you know their next move, you know who their enemies are and who their allies are. Maybe it's their position on trade negotiations. Maybe the prime minister has a health problem you need to plan for. You never know what might come through. Well, you kind of have to pat the CIA on the back for coming up with that. And then Kiriakou says the one critical nugget is all it takes. And he says that's exactly what Epstein was to the Israeli intelligence. Someone who had access, like the copy machine repairman who quietly delivered leverage on the world's elite. So back to Carlson. He addressed the claims that he's taking money from the Qatari government head on. You know that part of the Western intelligentsia to discredit Carlson is to say that he's an agent of the Qatari intelligence. And what was his reaction to this claim? Well, he literally laughed out loud. He said, maybe I was taking tons of money from some bad country. One of the bad countries you're not allowed to talk to, like Qatar, before he burst into laughter. That's the most hilarious thing, he says. Qatar is kind of controlling our conversation. Qatar, you mean evil Qatar? An audience member asked if Carlson was laughing, and he confirmed, yes, I'm laughing. He says, I've actually been to Qatar. It's awesome. Never taken a dollar from the Qataris, or whatever they're called. Great country. But even if I was, like on the payroll of Qatar, which I suppose it's like, well, I can't now. But even if I was taking money, it still would not make the question any less relevant. Why is this war with Iran a good idea? And their refusal to answer the question lets you know right away that you're not dealing with a person of good faith, he says. You're dealing with a propagandist who's trying to control you. So it just gets, I mean, this, when Kash Patel, and you know, the press conference where Patel is there and Bondi's there and Bongino is there, and as the press release said, looking like terrified schoolboys in a principal's office, insisting that Jeffrey Epstein actually did kill himself. Trump lost a significant portion of his base when this happened. There's an anti-MAGA movement inside of MAGA right now. I mean, this could be the end of Trump's administration. This absolute paramount act of hypocrisy on the part of the MAGA crowd, not MAGA crowd, MAGA leadership, excuse me, is enough to lose the House and the Senate in the midterms. And of course, their first line of action will be impeachment. And then you'll have Vance as president. I don't think you don't have to go away to wizard school or oracle school for very long to be able to come up with that prophecy. So Bongino, standing there like someone caught smoking cigarettes in the boys' bathroom, he says, well, I've seen the file. And now, to the shock of his remaining MAGA faithful, Trump's Justice Department announced in an unsigned memo, mind you, that the systematic review has revealed no incriminating client list. There is also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed anybody. They said, we didn't uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against the uncharged third parties. So exactly what file did Bongino see when he said, I saw the file? Shortly thereafter, the DOJ says there isn't any. So the evidence that the government explains, well, it must have been lost. We must have lost it after it was found in a safe in Epstein's sprawling New York pad, maybe? The one that contained all of the videotapes, maybe? So Attorney General Pam Bondi assured us a few months ago that the Epstein list was on her desk. And more chillingly, Bondi claimed that the FBI was reviewing the Epstein files and, quote, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn, and there are hundreds of victims. Tens of thousands of videos? Then, you know, I mean, she sure must have some kind of an imagination, now that there aren't any. Now, it's a bit surrealistic hearing this from someone who has the persona of a 59-year-old cheerleader. I mean, if any high school would permit such a thing. But she also famously stated that she had received a truckload of documents on the Epstein case after she'd been misled by the FBI. Truckloads? Tens of thousands of videos? Hundreds of victims? But now there's no credible evidence. So FBI Director Kash Patel vowed to release everything related to Jeffrey Epstein. He promised to revamp the FBI. He was going to move it outside of Washington, remember? calling it a part of the deep state. Instead now, he is building a shiny new headquarters inside of Washington. So welcome to the deep state, Cash. So Epstein is one of the more shadowy characters in recent history. His path to a billionaire sex trafficker began with a job as a math teacher at a private Dalton school in New York. He was hired by the school president, Donald Barr, a father of the Bush crime family loyalist, and Trump's second attorney general. You remember that? Don Barr. As with many of the rich and famous, there is a huge unexplained gap in Epstein's resume. Epstein went from math teacher to billionaire almost overnight. He was fast-tracked by someone, installed, as John Whitlock described it. And you can't really blame him for changing careers, going from math teacher to porn maker, flying celebrities on the Lolita Express to the Lolita Island would be a lot more exciting than figuring out some algebraic equations on the chalkboard. Hobnobbing with the likes of Trump, Clinton, Oprah, Prince Andrew, to name just a few of the glittering names on the now non-existing list. And that list, of course, does not exist. We've just been assured by the Department of Justice there is no list. Well, just what kind of list is this non-existing list? I mean, did Epstein write down all the famous names who sought his services? By that I mean his status as a high-class pimp for underage girls to satisfy his ego. Remember, others have done this. Frank Sinatra apparently kept a list of his female conquests in his dressing room to entertain his showbiz pals. The madam, I forget her name, the New York madam, when her list got exposed. So was the list related to Epstein blackmailing these rich and famous comrades? Is this what was on the lost videos from Epstein's safe? And then one rarely mentions the close confidant of Epstein was former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was a frequent visitor to Epstein's properties, including those where his stable of underage girls were housed. And Barak's name was on the Epstein list that appeared online. Remember, last year a judge ordered that this list be released, the one that now doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, maybe it never existed. So one of Epstein's many girlfriends alleged that he boasted of working for the Mossad. And their alleged handler claimed that both Epstein and his girl Friday, Ghislaine Maxwell, worked for the Israeli spy agency. And now does this mean that if there's no list, there's no videos, there's no compromising of important people, there's no intelligence gathering? Does that mean she's going to be let out of jail for having been charged for something that doesn't exist? Ari Ben-Menash made his allegations in his book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Ben-Menash supposedly had been Mossad's handler for Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, a very powerful publisher who'd be found. Remember, he was found floating naked and dead in the ocean? Just, in other words, you shouldn't go swimming naked. And as Ben-Menash colorfully put it, sex with a 14-year-old girl is a crime. And he was taking photos of politicians having sex with 14-year-old girls. If you want to get it straight, he said. He said they would just blackmail people. They would just blackmail people like that. So Ben-Menash, after his publication, you know this is coming, and I'm looking for it for Tucker Carlson. Excuse me. Was charged in the U.S. for arms dealing. But a jury acquitted him in 1990 after accepting his defense that he was acting on behalf of Israel. Israel made me do it. Hold on to that one. Write that one down. You might want to remember that. If you're on a list of people that might be gathered here before too long, just remember that one. Israel made me do it. Try that the next time you get pulled over for speeding. Israel made me do it. And then there was the death of Virginia Giuffre, perhaps the most vocal of all of Epstein's trafficking victims. If you recall, less than a month, she went from being photographed with a very bruised face, reporting that she only had a brief time to live after being involved in an auto accident with a school bus. The speculation that the injuries couldn't have come from what was described as a minor fender bender, to allegations that she was mentally disturbed, to her purported suicide. So there was a quote from her tweet to Elon Musk just before the 2024 election, expressing her desire to talk to him about everything she knew regarding Epstein and his list of now imaginary clients. And at the start of their recent feud, Musk charged that the Epstein list hadn't been released because Trump's name is on it. And then just the other day, Musk tweeted, "How can people be expected to have faith in Trump if he won't release the Epstein file?" Good question. Probably 99% of the MAGA faithful believe that Epstein was providing services to the likes of Bill Clinton and half of Hollywood, but not the MAGA leadership. Only a few think that Trump could have partaken of this Lolita for hire business. And there's a lot of pictures of Trump, sometimes with Melania, laughing it up with Epstein. And they sure look like they're close chums. Trump once said as much and noted how Epstein likes women almost as much as he does. Remember, he said that. And some of them are on the younger side, Trump said. But the MAGA faithful believe that a morally outraged Trump threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago once he found out what Epstein was really up to. Oh, give me a break. Apparently, all those females on the younger side that he had talked about earlier didn't arouse his suspicions. I imagine if you went to a private island and there were a preponderance of underage, scantily clad girls under 18 romping around, you might at least want to say, what's going on here? There are no Chuck E. Cheeses for nubile girls under 18, where no parents are allowed. Oh, this just gets more disgusting all the time. That's going to be it for this morning's program. I've got more I want to say about this, but it's going to have to wait till tomorrow. There we are. We are now through. We're now through with K-Talk. Oh, I forgot to announce my half off through the month of July for the K-Talk faithful. Half off new patients. Half off the initial fee for a new patient during the month of July. Shoot, I forgot to say that. You would call 801-523-1890. Sometimes I get too wrapped up in myself. But maybe some more about that. Maybe some more about this tomorrow. So I'm going to bring this to an end. For those on the stream, thank you for being a part of it. There is a comment thing where you can make comments, or if you have questions or something, or you to participate to some degree, which you can't do at K-Talk Radio. So I am going to end the stream, and I will happily see you.